Game of Shadows by Nim Frostblight share. Theo looked at the table, the 2 cards that were placed in front of him. He could feel the throbbing in his finger as he bit the inside of his lip, thinking. The backs of the cards were pitch black with a white circle in the middle. His fingers slid them towards him as he picked the cards up. His eyes looked over the cards. Ace of clubs and 7 of spades looked back. He held the cards close, and then looked back up at the other sinners around the table. For anyone that still doesn't know how the game is played, I'll explain, Jay said, his voice crisp. The goal is to obtain a pair, or convince everyone else that you have, Jay said, as a misty cloud of illusion displayed the words he spoke. You have 3 folds you can use before you are out and are deemed the loser, so use them wisely, Jay says, looking at Theo. Since you are new to hell, both you and Jaxa have to fold for you to use one up. Theo nods at him as he looks at his 2 mismatched cards. Good, now let's begin. I'll stand, Jay says, looking at the Shadow Demon. The Shadow Demon's purple eyes disappear for a moment, an equivalent to a blink. I fold, the Shadow Demon says as he tosses his cards onto the table. The demon's voice was low and gurgled as he spoke. Jay's attention moved to Theo. I'll stand, Theo says, his composure not breaking for a second. Jaxa looks at you, then places her cards on the table. I fold, she says with a hint of annoyance. Theo looks at the hooded woman, her blue eyes locked on Theo. I stand, she whispered. The woman's voice was clean and quiet as she held her cards close. Jay gave both Theo and the woman a look of content as he looked them in the eyes. Nice bluffs, he says, keeping his cards up. Know that we have passed around the table once. You get one last opportunity to fold before we reveal. If there's a tie, the highest pair wins, and then suits, diamonds, spades, hearts, clubs, in that order. And if we are all bluffing, then we all lose a fold. Jay says, I'll stand. Jay says, looking at Theo. Theo thinks for a moment, looking at his cards. The imperfect match is digging into his mind. The best I can do is hope we all don't have a pair. Stand, Theo says, as Jaxa gives him an approving smirk. Fold, the hooded woman says, placing her cards on the table. Theo looks at her with a confused look. I forgot to mention. If you reveal your hand without folding and someone else has a pair, it counts as losing 2 folds. Jay says, his jagged teeth scraping against each other in a wicked smile. Theo's breath goes cold as Jay reveals the new rule. He quickly looks at Jay in shock. Jay places his hand on the table, revealing a pair of 6s. Theo's eyes widened. Reveal your hand, kid, Jay says impatiently, his smile growing larger. Theo drops his cards, a poor display of failure. Shit, why didn't you say that before? Theo says in outrage. This is hell, kid. You think I'd reveal everything off the bat? Jay responded by collecting the cards and shuffling the deck again. Any more secret rules that I should know? Theo says in conceited anger. No, that is it. If I were to properly cheat, then I would instantly be declared the loser. Now that you have learned the game fully, we can keep playing. Jay says. So that's 1 bluff from Solon, 1 from our hooded friend, and 2 from you, Jay says, his grin sharpening again as he tossed the group cards. Wait, that round counted. Jaxa yells in outrage, standing up. Suddenly, black smoke wraps around her arms and legs and pins her to the wall. What the hell? Theo shouted. Behavior like that will not be tolerated in my establishment, Jay says. Now then, kid, pick up your cards. You'll be playing by yourself now. Makes things more thrilling, doesn't it? Jay says, looking at his own cards. Theo calms down and picks up his cards. Looking at them, King of clubs and King of diamonds. His eyes remain locked on the cards, then he lowers them slightly. The Shadow Demon Solon blinks again and puts his cards on the table. Fold, Solon says, looking up at Theo. Stand, Theo responds with a quivered breath. Fold, the cloaked woman says, placing her cards down. Fold, Jay says quickly, looking at Theo as Theo reveals his hand. Theo's eyes widen slightly. Jay reveals his folded hand, showing a queen of hearts and a queen of clubs. Congratulations, kid. You're still in for another round, Jay says, collecting the cards again. Theo thinks for a moment, looking at Solon, then at Jay. His mind races with ideas of what could be happening. He stays quiet as Jay passes another set of cards. Pick up your cards, kid, Jay says, picking up his own. I don't think I need to, Theo says, glaring at the 2. What? Jay says, laughing. And what makes you say that? Jay asks, intrigued. Because I figured out your game. Really now? Enlighten me then, Jay says, leaning over the table. You're cheating, Theo says, leaning back in his chair, his eye never once diverting from Jay's. Really now? That's a big accusation, Jay says, returning his glare. This is hell, of course you're cheating. Last round, everyone but me folded. Yet you still had a pair, but mine was higher. Theo explains. I don't see how that is cheating. It was a hunch, Jay says, grinning. A hunch that I had a suit higher than you who had that strong of a hand already? I don't think so. Theo says, his eyes never faltering. Then please explain how I cheated, Jay says. You and Solon are cheating. Every time I look at my cards, he blinks, yet I don't think a shadow has the need to blink. Theo says, glancing at Solon. He hasn't done it for any other reason since we entered the room, and I bet if we shine a light into the darkness behind me, we would know. Theo says, pulling out a small flashlight from his pocket and flicking it on. Suddenly, the light brightens the room, revealing a smoky shadow wrapped around the room, leading back to Solon's misty form. Suddenly, the smoke fades, releasing Jaxa from the wall and returning to Solon's body. Well done, kid, Jay says, clapping with a guttural chuckle. Solon here doesn't truly have a body, so his eyes can appear anywhere in the smoke, which makes for a good spy, don't you think? Does that mean I win? Theo says, taking a deep breath and sighing. My word is my bond, Jay says, putting up his hands in mock surrender. Not quite. The hooded woman says, looking at Theo. I didn't cheat, which means we still need to finish the round. The woman says, holding up her cards. Shit, I forgot you were still sitting there, Theo says, as his posture breaks for a moment. So did I, Jaxa says, rubbing her wrists. Reveal your cards, Theo. The woman says. Theo's eyes widen as he looks at the hooded woman. How do you know my name? Theo asks, picking up his cards, firmly gripping them as his body tenses. Wait, you knew we were coming here, didn't you? That's why there were exactly 2 empty chairs when we arrived, Jaxa says accusingly, her claws extending. The cloaked woman took off her hood as the room went silent. The only sound Theo could hear was his own heart beating. The woman's hair was a light blue with twisted horns and glowing ocean eyes. Focolor. Jaxa hisses, standing between the woman and Theo, her claws fully extending and her ears pinned back. Wait, you knew we were coming here, didn't you? That's why there were exactly 2 empty chairs when we arrived, Jaxa says accusingly, her claws extending. The cloaked woman took off her hood as the room went silent. The only sound Theo could hear was his own heart beating. The woman's hair was a light blue with twisted horns and glowing ocean eyes. Focolor. Jaxa hisses, standing between the woman and Theo, her claws fully extending and her ears pinned back. Then a while, Jaxa, Focolor says, her posture perfect and voice calm. That's why his blood was normal, Jaxa says. A Gosha's aura. A what? Theo asks. When a Gosha or a Sin gets too close to something holy, they both become mortal, Jaxa says, still holding her defensive stance in front of Theo, the end of her tail flicking. Holy? Jay asks, his voice satirical and amused. You're telling me this boy has some sort of holy aspect to him? Jay asks and nods at Solon. Solon's shadow moves to Theo, pinning him to his chair as the shadow slowly moves up Theo's body and removes his hood from his head, revealing his blonde hair. A human? Solon gurgles as his grip around Theo tightens. A human. Now that's a prophet I can't overlook. Jay says, his brow raises and his smile widens even more, even if it's just his body. Jay grins as Solon responds by tightening his grip to a crushing force around Theo's body. Back off, Jaxa shouted, beginning to move towards the shadowed man. Suddenly, a blue light of water and lightning shoots out of Focolor's hand, blasting Solon's misty body. The lightning runs through the cloud, dissipating it into vaporized nothingness, causing the room to go quiet again. Jay looks at where his colleague once was and now nothing. His eyes widened as he backed away from the table. Fuck this, he says, then quickly runs out of the room, leaving Theo, Jaxa, and Focolor alone to build the tension. Theo's eyes look at where Solon once stood, a soul completely erased from existence. The truest meaning of nothingness his mind is unable to comprehend. This was what it was like to see true death, not just loss, but the complete obliteration of something to less than darkness or a void, but an incomprehensible lack of anything. He sat there in silent shock as his mind spun, trying to grasp the concept. Jaxa, however, didn't falter. Her claws and fangs were still brought to bear, now moving towards Focolor. Reveal your cards, Theo, Focolor said, sitting back down, her voice calm and cold. We still have a game to play and a favor to create. Theo's head slowly turns to her as his shaky hand reaches for the cards. What the hell are you doing? Jaxa asks, turning to face Theo. The game isn't over, Theo says, looking at his cards. I stand as well, Focolor says, revealing her hand. A pair of aces, clubs, and hearts. Theo grins, his